Okay, so we're starting from the point that we've keyed out the sign and the track mats are all doing what they need to do to make sure that the image around that is fine and that everything in here is fully transparent. So the next step is to analyze the scene and to attach some objects to it. So I'm going to use these points here and I'm going to start attaching things. So I'm going to attach a solid, and that's going to bring in a camera. Now I'm going to also attach text and shadow catcher and light. I'm going to bring them all in at the same time because I want them all to stay perfectly lined up with each other, so that when I start playing around with lights and shadows, that everything is at the exact same angle. Now, first thing I need to do is line them all up. So rather than lining them all up individually, I'm going to use one object to do my realigning, and I'm going to parent three other objects, the light, the shadow catcher and the text, to that solid. So now when I do that work here, everything else gets brought with it. Okay, so when I realign things to get them at the right angle or close to the right angle, everything else goes with it. Now I'm going to elongate that solid a little bit and then do a little bit more work there. Now the goal here is to get it close enough that it matches the plane of the sign behind it, but it doesn't matter if this solid goes a little bit beyond the edge of the sign, because what we're going to do is we're going to drag that solid down beneath the keyed out sign, so it just sits in there behind the frame of the sign. Now don't worry about the color, we'll change that a little bit later as well. Okay, so a few little bits of tidying up here. I'm going to scale down my text just to get it into the sign. Move that across. Now again, I'm using the axes, so it's just going to slide across that solid. And the shadow catcher, I can just bring that down a little bit. It doesn't need to be particularly small or any particular size, because we're going to use a track mat to cut that shadow catcher to the edge of the sign in a moment. Okay, so next step, just pull out the text, see how the shadows are looking. Okay, so the shadows are kind of hard and going in the wrong direction, so I'll reposition the light, and probably need to reposition it on its X and Y. Just get the text or the shadow to kind of fall down and away, and fix the darkness and diffusion. Okay, so the text is kind of doing what it needs to do, so you could do a little bit more work here, line it up a little bit more, and do some kind of a text animator, or if you just wanted to sit on the sign, that's fine as well. But to get the shadow effect, you need the text to move away from the shadow catcher. Now we're going to do another step here, because if, for example, I were to get my light and push that light up further, you'll see that the text could potentially, now I'll actually darken the shadow just for a while, just so that we can see what's going on here. So you'll see here we could potentially run into a problem where the shadow runs down off the sign. That's because the shadow catcher is bigger than the sign. And we could try and line it up and reposition it and all that kind of stuff. There's an easier way of fixing this using a track mat. So a shadow catcher is just another shape or object that we can see on the composition window, and we can use track mats to cut or to limit where that is visible on screen. So I'm going to create another solid, and going to call this one shadow track mat. Click OK and position it just above the layer that I want it to have an effect on, which is the shadow catcher. And I'm going to go to Mocha, and I'm going to take this sign or this shape, which pretty much maps to the outside of the sign, and I'm going to export that, bring it back into After Effects, and I'm going to paste it onto my new shadow catcher track mat layer as a Mocha mask. So once I set that to be the track mat for the shadow catcher, if we zoom in here, Just see where we've got some nasty kind of shadows just falling down underneath the sign. When we change that to shadow track matte, we'll see that it now kind of cuts the shadow just there. So even if the light goes higher, you'll see that it doesn't cast a shadow down into thin air, which wouldn't obviously look right. Okay, so let's zoom out, pull that back up. And we see that everything is pretty much synced up now. We could obviously change that color using hue and saturation. We can bring that down or colorize it to a darker neutral looking red to match the color of the text. And what we could also do is we could replace that solid. Because it's a visible object, we can get things like textures, like this piece of plastic, and by holding down Alt we can click, drag and replace that layer down there with something that has a little bit of texture. Now the text has gone moving out there because I did that with all of these still parented. So when the texture came down, it was a bigger size, so that things all went out of sync. So I'll just unparent those and do that again, holding down Alt. So we can now get a bit of texture into that sign. Okay, so that finishes up the effect. Now obviously you'd spend a little bit more time tweaking this, animating the text, and revert to the finished version of the video to see the full effect